I am Hercule Poirot. Welcome to my new mystery story.
I confess that when my old friend Leonard Quarles invited me to what he termed a rather significant evening at Belmont House in Eaton Square, I had not anticipated that the significance would prove to be murder. But then, as I have learned through my association with Hercule Poirot, the most ordinary social gatherings can conceal the most extraordinary secrets. The occasion was the celebration of Sir Reginald Belmont's 70th birthday, though the gathering bore more resemblance to a wake than a celebration. Sir Reginald, the steel magnate whose fortune had built half the bridges in the empire, had been in declining health for months. His physician, Dr. Thornbury, had been quite frank with the family. The old gentleman's heart was failing, and it was merely a question of time. The drawing-room of Belmont House that October evening was a study in restrained elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the assembled company, while a fire crackled cheerfully in the massive marble fireplace. The guests, perhaps 20 in all, moved with the practiced ease of London society, their conversations a careful blend of genuine affection for their host and the inevitable speculation about his considerable estate. Sir Reginald himself presided from his favourite leather armchair, a glass of his prized Napoleon brandy at his elbow. Despite his frailty, his eyes remained sharp, and I noticed how they followed the movements of certain guests with particular attention. Beside him, in a chair of equal prominence, sat his second wife, Lady Cordelia Belmont. Lady Cordelia was a woman who commanded attention without effort. Perhaps 40 years of age, she possessed that particular brand of beauty that seems to improve with maturity. Dark hair swept elegantly back, intelligent grey eyes, and a composure that suggested depths unexplored. She had married Sir Reginald only 18 months prior, following a courtship that had set tongues wagging throughout Mayfair. The disparity in their ages was considerable, but none could deny that she had brought a renewed vitality to the old gentleman's final years. "Hastings," Quarles murmured at my elbow, "observe our hostess. There's something about her tonight that I cannot quite place." I followed his gaze to Lady Cordelia, who was engaged in quiet conversation with Miss Eleanor Belmont, Sir Reginald's spinster sister. Even from across the room I could see that Lady Cordelia's lips curved in a slight, enigmatic smile, not the practiced expression of a hostess, but something more private, more knowing. The other guests formed the usual constellation of family and associates. There was Marcus Belmont, Sir Reginald's son from his first marriage, a man of 40 whose gambling debts were whispered about in the clubs. His wife, the former Miss Patricia Worthington, maintained a brittle cheerfulness that spoke of financial anxieties. Dr. Thornbury moved among the guests with the quiet authority of a family physician, while Mr. Pemberton, Sir Reginald's business partner, seemed unusually subdued for such a gregarious man. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sir Reginald announced suddenly, his voice carrying despite its frailty. The room fell silent with the practiced ease of those accustomed to deference. "Before we proceed with our evening's festivities, I have an announcement of some importance." He reached for a sealed envelope that lay on the small table beside his chair. "I have today executed certain changes to my will, changes that I believe reflect not only my affections, but my judgment regarding the future of the Belmont legacy." The silence that followed was absolute. I saw Marcus Belmont's face tighten, while his wife's knuckles whitened around her champagne glass. Mr. Pemberton leaned forward slightly, his commercial instincts alert to opportunity or disaster. "The details," Sir Reginald continued, "will be made known at the appropriate time. For now, let us simply say that I am confident my decisions will surprise some and perhaps disappoint others." His eyes swept the room with something approaching mischief. "But I believe they are just." He raised his brandy glass in a toast. "To family, to friendship, and to the future." The assembled company raised their glasses in response, though I noticed the enthusiasm was notably restrained. Sir Reginald brought the crystal snifter to his lips and took a generous sip. The effect was immediate and terrible. His face contorted in sudden agony, and the glass fell from nerveless fingers to shatter against the Persian carpet. He clutched at his throat, his eyes wide with terror and confusion. A sound escaped him, not quite a word, more a strangled plea. Dr. Thornbury was beside him in an instant, but even as the physician's skilled hands sought a pulse, I could see it was too late. Sir Reginald Belmont convulsed once, violently, and then was still. In the chaos that followed, the screams, the rushing about, the inevitable summons to the police, I found my attention drawn inexorably to Lady Cordelia. She had not moved from her chair. She sat perfectly composed, her hands folded in her lap, watching the scene with an expression of calm interest. And beneath the black lace veil she had somehow procured and donned with remarkable swiftness, that same enigmatic smile played about her lips. It was not the smile of grief, nor of shock, nor even of relief. It was the smile of a woman who had been expecting exactly what had occurred. Dr. Thornbury, his examination complete, looked up with the gravity of a man delivering a verdict. "I'm afraid Sir Reginald is dead. The symptoms—" He paused, his professional discretion warring with obvious concern. "Inspector, I must advise you that this was not a natural death. The convulsions, the rapidity of onset, I believe Sir Reginald was poisoned." As Inspector Bradshaw of the Metropolitan Police took charge of the scene, I found myself thinking of my friend Poirot and his oft-repeated maxim that the psychology of crime was far more revealing than its physical evidence. Here, in this elegant drawing-room, surrounded by crystal and silk and the trappings of civilization, someone had committed murder with calculated precision. And through it all, the widow smiled. I excused myself quietly and made my way to the telephone in Sir Reginald's study. The operator connected me swiftly to Whitehaven Mansions. "Poirot," I said when that familiar, precise voice answered. "It's Hastings. I'm afraid I need your help rather urgently. There's been a murder in Eaton Square, and I have the distinct impression that what we've witnessed tonight is merely the opening move in a far more complex game." "Ah, mon ami," came the reply, tinged with that mixture of sympathy and professional interest I knew so well. "Tell to me, quickly, the circumstances." A wealthy man, poisoned at his own birthday celebration just after announcing changes to his will. And Poirot, there's something about the widow. She smiles even now behind her veil. It's most unsettling. There was a brief pause, during which I could almost see my friend's grey cells arranging themselves with their customary precision. "Hastings, I will come at once. Touch nothing, observe everything, and above all, watch carefully this widow who smiles. In my experience, such composure in the face of tragedy is either the mark of complete innocence or complete guilt. We must determine which." As I returned to the drawing-room, where Inspector Bradshaw was beginning his preliminary interviews, I caught sight of Lady Cordelia once more. She had risen from her chair and stood now by the window, gazing out into the gaslit square. The black veil stirred gently with her breathing, but that mysterious smile remained constant. Whatever secrets lay behind that smile, I was confident that Hercule Poirot would uncover them. The game, as he was fond of saying, was afoot. I returned to the drawing-room to find Inspector Bradshaw had imposed that peculiar order which follows violent death. The guests had been herded into the morning-room under police supervision, their shocked murmurs filtering through the partially opened door. The scene of the crime itself remained untouched, save for Dr. Thornbury's brief examination, the shattered brandy glass catching the lamplight like scattered diamonds against the dark stains spreading through the Persian carpet. 20 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Through the doorway, I observed our suspects with growing fascination. Marcus Belmont paced restlessly, his face pale beneath its customary flush occasionally glancing toward the sealed envelope that still rested beside his father's chair. His wife, Patricia, clung to his arm, her earlier brittle cheerfulness replaced by wide-eyed terror that seemed genuine enough. She kept casting accusatory glances toward Lady Cordelia as if the widow's composure itself constituted evidence of guilt. Miss Eleanor Belmont sat rigidly upright, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, as though her brother had committed a final breach of etiquette by dying so dramatically. Mr. Pemberton stood apart from the others, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable, though his eyes seemed to calculate the new landscape of the Belmont business empire. But it was Lady Cordelia who continued to command my attention. She had removed her black veil with the same mysterious swiftness with which she had donned it, folding the lace meticulously before placing it in her silk reticule. When Inspector Bradshaw questioned her, she responded with quiet precision, recounting the evening's events without the slightest tremor in her voice. Her narrative was flawless in its detail and utterly devoid of emotion, as if she were describing a scene from a play rather than her husband's violent death. The sound of familiar footsteps announced Poirot's arrival before Constable Morrison could escort him into the drawing-room. My friend entered with his characteristic precision, immaculately dressed despite the late hour, his dark eyes immediately cataloguing every detail of the scene. Inspector Bradshaw, who had worked with Poirot previously, greeted him with grudging respect. "Monsieur Poirot, good of you to come. Nasty business, this. Sir Reginald Belmont, poisoned at his own birthday celebration." Poirot bowed gravely, his gaze fixed upon the shattered glass. "Indeed, Inspector, you will permit that I make the little observations?" "Of course. Dr. Thornbury here believes it was something quick-acting. The symptoms were consistent with alkaloid poisoning." Dr. Thornbury stepped forward, a distinguished man with silver hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. "The rapidity of onset, the convulsions, Monsieur Poirot, I've seen similar cases in my practice. Death occurred within minutes of ingestion. I stake my professional reputation that this was not natural death." "Bon." Poirot moved closer to Sir Reginald's chair, his keen eyes studying the arrangement of furniture, the positioning of the side table, the angle of the fallen glass. He knelt carefully beside the carpet stain, inhaling delicately. "The brandy. It was from where?" "Napoleon brandy from his private reserve," I offered. Sir Reginald was quite proud of his collection. "And who had the access to this glass during the evening?" Dr. Thornbury hesitated. "Well, any of the guests could have approached during the evening. People moved about freely, offering congratulations. The glass was left unattended on several occasions." "Curious." Poirot rose, brushing an invisible speck from his trousers. "Inspector, before we proceed, tell me of this announcement regarding the will." Bradshaw consulted his notebook. "Made some changes earlier today, he did. Said it would surprise some, disappoint others. Rather dramatic, if you ask me." "Most dramatic, yes." Poirot's eyes found the EI but sealed envelope. "This we do not open yet. The motive, it declares itself too loudly when one reads words meant to sting." He paused, his gaze moving toward the morning room where Lady Cordelia waited with the others. "Now, Hastings, tell me once more of this smile you observed." I described again the widow's unsettling composure, her enigmatic expression that suggested she had witnessed exactly what she expected. Poirot listened with complete attention, his grey cells already beginning their methodical work. "Fascinating," he murmured. "A widow who smiles at her husband's death. This suggests either remarkable callousness or remarkable preparation." His eyes gleamed with that familiar light of intellectual challenge. "Come, mon ami. It is time to meet our suspects. But first, we observe. In my experience, the guilty party often reveals themselves not by what they say, but by what they do not say, and how they do not say it." As we moved toward the morning room, I caught sight of Lady Cordelia through the doorway. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, that same mysterious smile playing about her lips. Whatever secrets lay behind that expression, I was confident Poirot would uncover them. The morning room had transformed into an impromptu court of inquiry, its elegant furnishings bearing witness to circumstances far removed from their intended purpose. Poirot entered with his characteristic precision, acknowledging each occupant with a slight bow that managed to convey both sympathy and authority. The assembled company watched him with varying degrees of apprehension, their earlier shock giving way to the uncomfortable realization that one among them was a murderer. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot began, his voice carrying that peculiar quality of gentle command I had witnessed so many times before, "I am Hercule Poirot. Inspector Bradshaw has requested my assistance in understanding these tragic circumstances. With your permission, I should like to speak with each of you, beginning with those closest to Sir Reginald." Lady Cordelia rose first, smoothing her black silk dress with deliberate precision. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I'm entirely at your disposal." Her voice held no trace of grief or shock, merely the cool courtesy of a hostess accommodating an unexpected guest. That enigmatic smile flickered briefly across her features before settling into an expression of polite attention. We retired to Sir Reginald's study, where gaslight from Eaton Square cast shifting shadows across the leather-bound volumes. Poirot gestured for Lady Cordelia to take the chair opposite his, while I positioned myself discreetly by the window, notebook at the ready. "Madame," Poirot began, settling himself with characteristic care, "you have suffered a terrible loss tonight. Please tell me of your husband's final hours." "Reginald was as well as could be expected, given Dr. Thornbury's prognosis," she replied smoothly. "We all knew his time was limited. He seemed particularly animated this evening, excited about his announcement regarding the will." "Ah, yes, the will. You were consulted regarding these changes?" For the first time, Lady Cordelia's composure flickered almost imperceptibly. "A wife does not presume to direct her husband's business affairs, Monsieur Poirot." The response came too quickly, too perfectly rehearsed. "Naturellement. But surely you had some indication of his intentions." Lady Cordelia's fingers tightened around the arms of her chair. Reginald had grown increasingly concerned about Marcus's gambling debts. He spoke often of responsibility, of ensuring his legacy would not be squandered. I believe he intended to make provisions protecting the family fortune from imprudent management. "And this would benefit you how? Precisely?" "I'm a wealthy woman in my own right, Monsieur Poirot. My first husband left me quite comfortably provided for. I married Reginald for affection, not financial necessity." Again, that perfectly modulated response, devoid of genuine emotion. Poirot made a small note. "The Napoleon brandy your husband favored, you are familiar with his collection?" "Naturally. I often selected his evening brandy myself. Reginald trusted my judgment in such matters." She paused, her grey eyes meeting Poirot's steadily. "I chose tonight's bottle personally from his private reserve." After Lady Cordelia departed, we returned to the morning room where Poirot addressed the remaining company. "Now, if you please, we must establish the precise sequence of events. Dr. Thornbury, you observed Sir Reginald consume brandy before the fatal toast." "Indeed," the physician replied. "He took a small sip perhaps 10 minutes earlier. I was present. Nothing unusual occurred then." Marcus Belmont shifted uncomfortably. "Father always had his evening brandy. It was his ritual, especially the Napoleon Reserve. He was quite particular about it." At this moment, the butler Kersey appeared in the doorway. "Begging pardon, sir. I set out the decanters before dinner and brought up the Napoleon from the cellarette myself." Sir Reginald poured his own glass, as was his custom. During those final minutes, several guests approached to offer congratulations. Mr. Pemberton, Mrs. Marcus at the piano with her ladyship, Miss Belmont near the doctor. The footman Alan brought in petit four for coffee service. Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest. So we have a window of opportunity between the harmless sip and the fatal draught. Most illuminating. He turned back to the company, his gaze moving from face to face. The poison. It was introduced with precision during those crucial minutes, but how and by whom? Patricia Belmont clutched her husband's arm, her earlier composure cracking. Marcus's eyes darted nervously toward the sealed envelope still resting in the drawing room. Mr. Pemberton maintained his urbane mask, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Miss Eleanor pressed her lips into a thin line of disapproval. "We will speak with each of you individually," Poirot announced. "But first, I observe that someone in this room possessed both the knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits and the opportunity to act upon that knowledge. The question remains, who among you had both motive and means to commit this most audacious crime?" The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of London traffic beyond the windows. Marcus Belmont was summoned first, his nervous energy barely contained as he settled into the chair his stepmother had vacated moments before. His hands trembled as he reached for his cigarette case, and I observed how his eyes avoided direct contact with Poirot's penetrating gaze. "Monsieur Belmont," Poirot began with characteristic gentleness, "your father's announcement regarding his will came as a surprise?" "Complete surprise," Marcus replied, drawing deeply on his cigarette. "Father had grown increasingly critical of my financial decisions, but I never imagined he would act so dramatically." His voice carried a bitter edge. He always believed in what he called earned inheritance. "These financial difficulties, they are substantial." Marcus's face flushed crimson. "Temporary setbacks. Nothing more. Perhaps £15,000 to various gaming establishments, but father had an exaggerated notion of their significance." The admission hung in the air, stark and damning. "And during the evening you approached your father's chair?" "Naturally. I offered congratulations, shook his hand just before the toast. He said something about seeing who deserves what." Marcus's cigarette trembled between his fingers. "I did not touch his glass, if that's what you're implying." Patricia Belmont entered next. Her earlier terror crystallized into desperate determination. Her hands twisted a handkerchief as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is all so dreadful, Monsieur Poirot. Sir Reginald was always kind to me, despite Marcus's troubles, but lately he'd grown so suspicious of everyone." She glanced toward the door nervously. "The creditors have grown impatient. They've made certain threats about Marcus's debts." "You observed Lady Cordelia's behavior this evening?" Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "She requested I play Chopin at the piano, said it would please Sir Reginald. From there, I had a clear view of his chair. She approached him several times, adjusting the flowers, speaking quietly. And that smile, Monsieur Poirot, even when the doctor pronounced the word poison, she never lost that dreadful smile. Mr. Pemberton proved more formidable, answering with the precision of a man accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Sir Reginald had grown concerned about succession, Monsieur Poirot. He worried Marcus lacked the temperament for commercial leadership. We'd discussed various protective arrangements. Arrangements benefiting you? Our interests were aligned after 20 years of partnership. But I must say, Lady Cordelia's influence had become concerning. She encouraged Sir Reginald's doubts about his son, suggested that capability mattered more than blood relation. Some of us found her advocacy for radical changes to the will rather troubling. Miss Eleanor Belmont entered with rigid dignity, her disapproval radiating like heat from a furnace. "This entire affair is deeply unseemly, Monsieur Poirot. That woman has been poisoning Reginald's mind against his family for months. She isolated him, filled his head with suspicions about Marcus, convinced him his own blood couldn't be trusted." Dr. Thornbury's interview revealed disturbing medical details. "The poison was sophisticated, Monsieur Poirot, something that would mimic cardiac failure while acting far more rapidly. Sir Reginald's health had actually stabilized recently. With proper care, he might have lived another year. This was not the work of an amateur. As the interviews concluded, Kersey appeared with crucial information. "Begging pardon, sir, but I must mention Lady Cordelia sent me twice to the cellaret for the Napoleon brandy. First bottle, after the sweet course, then again later, claiming the first had lost its bouquet. Sir Reginald kept the first bottle, said he preferred it. The second went untouched on the sideboard." Poirot's eyes sharpened with interest. 2 bottles were opened. "Yes, sir, most unusual, as Sir Reginald was particular about his brandy." At that moment, the footman Allen appeared, holding a crumpled damask napkin. "Found this in the passage near the music room, sir. Has a peculiar stain." Poirot examined the linen without touching the irregular mark, his grey eyes suddenly very bright. He returned to the drawing-room, standing where Sir Reginald had sat, studying the small table with intense concentration. He observed how the flower arrangement had been turned slightly, as if to obscure the glass from certain angles of approach. "Hastings," he murmured, "we have before us a most instructive case. Multiple suspects with compelling motives, each with opportunity. Yet one among them possesses that particular combination of knowledge, access, and cold calculation necessary for this sophisticated crime. The evidence begins to speak, but we must listen carefully to what it truly says." The web of suspicion was tightening, but the final truth remained tantalizingly beyond reach. Poirot gestured for the company to resume their positions as they had been during Sir Reginald's final moments. With the precision of a theatre director, he guided each person to their exact location, his keen eyes studying the arrangement with intense concentration. "Madame Patricia, if you would be so kind as to return to the piano. Lady Cordelia, your chair beside your husband. Dr. Thornbury, you stood near the fireplace, yes? And Monsieur Marcus, you approached your father's chair for the congratulations." He watched them settle, then moved to examine the sight lines from each position. "Now, Hastings, observe carefully. From the piano, can one see the brandy glass clearly?" I studied the arrangement, noting how the elaborate flower display on the small table created a partial screen. "Not entirely, Poirot. The arrangement blocks the direct view, though one might glimpse movement." "Precisely. And Lady Cordelia, when you adjusted these flowers earlier, you turned them slightly, did you not?" Her grey eyes met his steadily. "The arrangement appeared unbalanced. I merely corrected it." "Most thoughtful. Yet this small adjustment conceals the glass from the pianist while revealing it clearly to one standing by the fireplace." Poirot's tone remained conversational, but I detected the steel beneath the silk. Curious positioning for a woman concerned with aesthetic balance. Patricia's hands trembled as she touched the piano keys. "I could see Sir Reginald clearly, Monsieur Poirot. I watched him raise the glass for the toast." "Indeed, madame. But could you see what transpired at the crucial moment before he raised it?" Poirot moved to examine the crumpled napkin Allen had discovered, holding it delicately in his handkerchief. The faint stain caught the lamplight, revealing a peculiar reddish tinge with an almost metallic sheen. He brought it close to his nose, inhaling with the delicacy of a wine connoisseur. "Not brandy, this. There is something floral beneath the bitterness, violets perhaps, but with an alkaline quality most distinctive." Inspector Bradshaw frowned at the seemingly insignificant fabric. "Looks like nothing to me, Monsieur Poirot." "Ah, but Inspector, in a household where everything is of the finest quality, nothing often conceals everything." Poirot turned to Patricia, whose face had grown increasingly pale. "Madame, Kersey mentioned you requested a fresh napkin just before the toast." Yes, I had spilled a little sherry on my glove. Is that now to be held against me?" Her voice carried a note of desperate indignation. At that moment, Dr. Thornbury approached with obvious reluctance. "Monsieur Poirot, there is something I must confess that troubles me greatly. During my recent visits to Sir Reginald, Lady Cordelia often inquired about his medications, his condition, the precise effects of various substances on a man in his state of health. Poirot's eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. Medical inquiries from a concerned wife? Far more specific than wifely concern would warrant. She asked about drug interactions, what symptoms might mask the effects of external toxins, which substances might prove dangerous to a cardiac patient. Her questions were remarkably clinical, almost professional in their precision. Lady Cordelia's composure remained absolute. I wished to understand my husband's condition thoroughly. Knowledge seemed preferable to ignorance when caring for an invalid. Most commendable, Poirot murmured. And your first husband's pharmaceutical investments would have provided considerable knowledge in such matters. For the first time, Lady Cordelia's perfect composure flickered almost imperceptibly. My late husband's business affairs were extensive. I naturally absorbed some understanding of his commercial interests. Inspector Bradshaw consulted his notebook with growing interest. Funny you should mention that, Monsieur Poirot. Our inquiries reveal that Lady Cordelia's first husband owned substantial interests in Ashworth Chemical Works, specializing in medicinal compounds. She would have had access to various substances through those connections. The revelation sent a visible tremor through the assembled company. Marcus stopped his restless pacing, his face drawn with new understanding. Patricia clutched her handkerchief more tightly, while Mr. Pemberton's commercial mask slipped to reveal naked calculation. Furthermore, Bradshaw continued, Lady Cordelia has been consulting with solicitors about inheritance law, particularly regarding recent changes affecting second wives' rights. Preparation and knowledge, Poirot observed quietly. The twin foundations of successful crime. Yet we must not leap to conclusions, for I perceive that someone wishes us to do precisely that. He moved to the sideboard where the untouched second bottle of Napoleon brandy still stood. 2 bottles opened, yet only 1 consumed. This suggests either waste, unlikely in a household of such precision, or deliberate misdirection. Alan, the footman, shifted nervously. Begging pardon, sir, but I passed Mrs. Marcus in the passage just before the toast. She seemed quite flustered, hurrying toward the music room. Patricia turned on him with sudden fury. I was looking for my handkerchief. I dropped it earlier and thought I saw it under a chair. Under which chair, madame? Poirot asked gently. I don't recall exactly. It was all confusion. She looked desperately toward Marcus, who avoided her gaze. Poirot studied the stained napkin once more, his grey cells clearly working at their customary efficiency. The pattern begins to emerge, Hastings. Someone has taken considerable care to construct what appears to be compelling evidence against a particular suspect. The napkin, conveniently discovered. The pharmaceutical knowledge, dramatically revealed. The flustered behavior, carefully witnessed. He looked up with that familiar gleam of intellectual challenge. But the true artist of crime does not rely merely on obvious opportunity. They create specific opportunity, one that appears innocent to all but themselves. Lady Cordelia watched this exchange with that same enigmatic smile, as if observing a performance staged for her entertainment. When she spoke, her voice held a note of almost amused detachment. How fascinating to watch the wheels of justice turn, Monsieur Poirot. Though I confess, your methods seem rather more theatrical than I had expected. Madame, Poirot replied with perfect courtesy. In my experience, the most theatrical crimes often conceal the most methodical minds. We shall see which proves true in this case. The web of evidence was tightening, but I sensed that my friend had already begun to perceive the true pattern beneath the carefully constructed deception. Inspector Bradshaw cleared his throat with the satisfaction of a man reaching an inevitable conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, based on the evidence before us, I believe we have sufficient grounds to proceed with an arrest. His gaze fixed upon Lady Cordelia with official certainty. Lady Cordelia Belmont, I'm charging you with the willful murder of your husband, Sir Reginald Belmont. The pronouncement struck the assembled company like a physical blow. Patricia gasped audibly, pressing her handkerchief to her lips, while Marcus stepped forward with surprising protectiveness. "Inspector, surely this is premature. My stepmother may be many things, but—" "The facts speak plainly, sir," Bradshaw interrupted firmly. "Motive: substantial inheritance and freedom from an elderly husband whose health was failing. Means: extensive knowledge of pharmaceutical compounds through her first husband's chemical works. Opportunity: she selected the brandy personally and had multiple chances to approach the glass unobserved." He gestured toward the evidence they had assembled. "Her unnaturally composed behavior throughout this ordeal only confirms what the physical evidence suggests." Lady Cordelia rose with perfect dignity, that enigmatic smile never wavering. "How efficient of you, Inspector. I confess I'm almost impressed by the thoroughness with which you have constructed your case." She extended her hands with calm resignation. "Shall we proceed with the formalities?" But Poirot raised one small, perfectly manicured hand. "A moment, Inspector. With your permission, I should like to examine one small detail before we proceed." His gray eyes held that familiar gleam of intellectual challenge. "For in my experience, when a case appears too perfectly resolved, it is often because someone has taken great care to make it appear so." He moved to the sideboard where both bottles of Napoleon brandy stood, studying them with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. "The second bottle, opened but barely touched, most instructive. Kersey, you mentioned Lady Cordelia specifically requested this second bottle." "Yes, sir. Said the first had lost its bouquet, though I detected no difference myself." Poirot lifted the bottle carefully, noting how the cork had been replaced but not pressed fully home. "Observe, Hastings. The seal is broken, yet the level remains precisely as it would after the initial opening. No evaporation, no sampling. This bottle was opened for theatrical effect, not consumption." Dr. Thornbury leaned forward, his professional curiosity aroused. "What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot?" "I am suggesting that someone wished to create the impression of tampering where none occurred. The poison entered Sir Reginald's system from his original glass, the one he had been drinking from throughout the evening. But consider this crucial detail: the poison was not introduced into the bottle, but applied directly to the glass itself." He moved to stand beside Sir Reginald's chair, his movements precise and deliberate. "The symptoms Dr. Thornbury described indicate a concentrated dose of what our preliminary analysis suggests is a derivative of Aconitum napellus, wolfsbane. Such a substance would act within minutes when applied in sufficient concentration, but it requires direct contact with the victim's lips." Patricia's voice rose with nervous energy. "But that's impossible. I was watching from the piano throughout the evening. I would have seen anyone tampering with Sir Reginald's glass." "Ah, madame, but would you?" Poirot gestured toward the flower arrangement, which had been subtly repositioned. "After Lady Cordelia's thoughtful adjustment of these blooms, the glass became invisible from your position during the crucial moments, yet it remained clearly visible to someone standing by the fireplace." He picked up the stained napkin once more, holding it delicately in his handkerchief. "This fabric tells a most interesting story. The stain contains traces of our alkaloid poison, but not in the pattern one would expect from accidental transfer during the crime. The absorption, the concentration, the way the fibers have reacted, all indicate this evidence was manufactured after the fact, not created during the commission of murder." Allen shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I found that napkin in the passage near the music room, not anywhere close to Sir Reginald's chair." "Precisely." Poirot's voice carried a note of triumph. "The napkin was planted as evidence, placed where it would implicate someone who had legitimate reason to be in that passage. But the true murderer failed to consider that such manufactured evidence would reveal its artificial nature under careful examination." Lady Cordelia watched this demonstration with apparent fascination, her composure remaining absolute. "How remarkably thorough you are, Monsieur Poirot. Though I confess I fail to see how this absolves me of suspicion. I still possessed the knowledge, the opportunity, and as the inspector noted, the motive. Because, madame, you have been cast as the leading lady in an elaborate theatrical performance. Someone has taken extraordinary care to ensure that every piece of evidence points directly to you, the pharmaceutical knowledge so dramatically revealed, the suspicious behavior so carefully witnessed, the planted evidence so conveniently discovered. Poirot's eyes swept the assembled company. But the true artist of crime does not wish to be discovered. They prefer to remain in the shadows while their carefully selected scapegoat takes center stage. At that moment, his sharp eyes caught something that made him pause. He moved swiftly to the small table beside Sir Reginald's chair, his expression suddenly grave. "The envelope," he said softly. I followed his gaze and felt a chill of understanding. The sealed envelope containing Sir Reginald's will changes, the document that had prompted this entire evening's drama, was no longer on the table where it had rested throughout our investigation. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of London traffic. Then the room erupted in exclamations of shock and accusation. Patricia cried out in dismay, Marcus cursed under his breath, and Miss Eleanor declared with righteous indignation that thieves now prowled among murderers. Inspector Bradshaw was immediately alert, barking orders to seal the house completely. "Which of you was nearest to this table during our discussions?" "No one approached it directly," Lady Cordelia observed with that same unsettling calm. "We have all been gathered at the sideboard, observing Monsieur Poirot's examination of the evidence, which means, Inspector, that either the theft occurred before we began our investigation, or the thief possesses remarkable audacity." "Not before," Poirot said quietly, his voice carrying that dangerous softness I had learned to recognize. "During. When all attention was focused elsewhere, someone took advantage of our concentration on the physical evidence to remove the one document that might have revealed the true motive for this crime." He turned to face the assembled suspects, his gray cells clearly working at their customary efficiency. "The murderer has now revealed themselves through this desperate act. For only someone with intimate knowledge of that envelope's contents would dare such a risk. They have shown us that the will, not mere inheritance, but specific provisions within it, holds the key to understanding why Sir Reginald had to die tonight at this precise moment before those changes could be properly witnessed and executed. The web of deception was beginning to unravel, but I sensed that my friend had only begun to expose the intricate psychology behind this most audacious crime. The theft of the will had created an electric tension that crackled through the drawing room like static before a storm. Inspector Bradshaw's constables conducted their search with methodical thoroughness, but the envelope had vanished as completely as morning mist. The assembled company watched this fruitless endeavor with expressions ranging from genuine bewilderment to carefully controlled anxiety. Poirot observed these reactions with the intensity of a naturalist studying specimens under glass. His gray eyes moved from face to face, cataloging each micro-expression, each nervous gesture, each telling silence. When he spoke, his voice carried that peculiar quality of gentle authority that could make the guilty squirm while comforting the innocent. "Most illuminating," he murmured, settling himself with characteristic precision. "The disappearance of this document tells us far more than its contents ever could. For consider, mes amis, why destroy evidence unless that evidence condemns you beyond redemption?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier bravado replaced by genuine unease. "But surely anyone might have taken it. The inheritance affects us all." "Ah, but does it?" Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest. "Tell me, Monsieur Marcus, what did you expect your father's will to contain before tonight's announcement?" "The usual provisions, I suppose. The estate divided among family, with perhaps some bequests to long-time servants." Marcus's voice carried a defensive edge. "I never presumed to know father's exact intentions. Yet you seemed remarkably unsurprised by his dramatic announcement, almost as if you had been expecting such changes." Poirot turned to Patricia, whose handkerchief had been twisted into an unrecognizable knot. "And you, madame? What were your expectations?" Patricia's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I feared Marcus would be disinherited entirely. His gambling debts, the creditors' threats. Sir Reginald had grown so disappointed." She glanced toward her husband with desperate eyes. "But we never imagined he would change everything so suddenly." Dr. Thornbury stepped forward, his professional composure somewhat strained. "If I may, Monsieur Poirot, Sir Reginald had been contemplating these changes for several weeks. He consulted me about the stress such decisions might place on his heart. How thoughtful of him to seek medical counsel before rewriting his will," Poirot observed with deceptive mildness. "And what was your professional advice, Doctor?" "I advised him to proceed carefully, to avoid any sudden shocks or confrontations that might prove harmful to his condition." Dr. Thornbury's hands clasped behind his back, a gesture I had noticed him repeat several times during our investigation. His heart had actually improved recently. With proper care, he might have lived considerably longer than we initially expected. At this moment, Kersey appeared in the doorway with obvious reluctance. "Begging pardon, sir, but the fire in the drawing-room has burned rather low. Shall I tend to it?" "By all means," Poirot replied, but his eyes had sharpened with sudden interest. "In fact, Hastings, let us observe this domestic ritual. Sometimes the most mundane activities reveal the most extraordinary secrets." We returned to the drawing-room, where Kersey knelt before the fireplace with practiced efficiency. As he stirred the dying coals with the brass poker, several fragments of what appeared to be heavy paper scattered across the hearth. The butler paused, frowning at the unusual debris. "Most curious," he murmured. "This appears to be document paper, sir. Quite expensive quality from the look of it." Poirot knelt beside the fireplace, studying the fragments without touching them. Even partially consumed by flame, I could make out portions of official letterhead and what appeared to be legal terminology. The paper bore the distinctive watermark of Sir Reginald's solicitor. "The missing envelope," I breathed, understanding flooding through me. "Indeed, mon ami, but observe the pattern of burning. These fragments were not simply tossed into the flames. They were fed carefully, methodically, by someone who understood the importance of complete destruction." Poirot rose, his expression grave. "Yet even the most careful criminal leaves traces for those who know how to look." Dr. Thornbury had followed us into the drawing-room, his face pale as he observed the charred remains. "Surely this proves nothing definitive. Anyone could have destroyed those documents." "Anyone, yes, but not everyone had the opportunity." Poirot's voice carried that dangerous softness I had learned to recognize. "The timing is most instructive, Doctor. The will disappeared during our investigation when attention was focused elsewhere, yet you remained in the morning room throughout, did you not?" Yes, naturally. Where else would I have gone?" "Nowhere, perhaps. But consider this small detail. When we repositioned everyone according to their locations during Sir Reginald's final moments, you stood by the fireplace. From that position, one could easily dispose of unwanted documents while appearing to simply warm oneself by the flames." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Dr. Thornbury's professional composure began to crack visibly, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for his medical bag. A gesture that seemed to comfort him. "You are suggesting that I, a man sworn to preserve life, would commit murder and then destroy evidence?" His voice carried a note of desperate indignation. "The idea is preposterous." "Is it?" Poirot moved closer, his gray eyes studying the doctor's face with scientific precision. "You possessed intimate knowledge of Sir Reginald's condition, his medications, his vulnerabilities. You understood exactly what substances would prove fatal and how they might be administered without detection. Most importantly, you knew that his recent improvement meant he might live far longer than anyone anticipated, long enough, perhaps, to reconsider certain provisions in his will." Lady Cordelia, who had been observing this exchange with her characteristic composure, spoke for the first time since the will's disappearance. How fascinating to watch the web unravel, Monsieur Poirot. Though I confess, I'd suspected Dr. Thornbury's involvement from the beginning. His reaction to the pharmaceutical questions was rather telling. The doctor turned on her with sudden fury. Your influence poisoned that family. Your constant manipulations, your whispers about loyalty and blood relations. Sir Reginald was a generous man until you filled his head with suspicions. Ah, Poirot said softly. Now we approach the truth. Not mere greed, but wounded pride. Not simple inheritance, but the fear of losing what one believed was rightfully earned. His voice carried a note of almost paternal understanding. 23 years of faithful service, was it not, Doctor? 23 years of midnight calls, of tending to that family's health, of believing yourself indispensable. The confession was written in Dr. Thornbury's face before he spoke a word. The careful mask of professional dignity crumbled, revealing the bitter disappointment beneath. But Poirot raised a hand before the doctor could speak. Not yet, mon ami. First, we must understand exactly how this most audacious crime was committed. The method, I believe, was as elegant as it was deadly. The web of deception was finally beginning to unravel, but I sensed that my friend had only begun to expose the full scope of this psychological masterpiece. Dr. Thornbury stood frozen beside the fireplace, the charred fragments of the will at his feet serving as mute testimony to his desperation. His medical bag trembled in his grip, and I observed how his professional composure, maintained through decades of practice, was dissolving before our eyes like salt in water. 23 years, Poirot repeated softly, his voice carrying that peculiar mixture of sympathy and inexorable logic that could simultaneously comfort and condemn. 23 years of faithful service, of believing yourself to be more than merely the family physician. You were confidant, advisor, almost a member of the family itself, until Lady Cordelia arrived. The doctor's knuckles whitened around his medical bag. Sir Reginald trusted me completely. When his first wife died, I was there through the long nights of grief. When Marcus contracted scarlet fever as a child, I saved his life with my own hands. When business pressures threatened Sir Reginald's heart, I guided him through every crisis. His eyes blazed with wounded pride. I was indispensable to that family. Until you were not, Poirot observed with clinical precision. A woman arrived who brought her own connections, her own influences, her own vision for the Belmont legacy. Suddenly, the trusted family physician found himself merely another employee, replaceable and increasingly irrelevant. Lady Cordelia watched this exchange with renewed interest. That enigmatic smile finally explained. Dr. Thornbury made his feelings about my marriage quite clear from the beginning. He seemed to believe I was somehow unworthy of Sir Reginald's affections, or perhaps, more accurately, unworthy of influencing his testamentary dispositions. You destroyed everything. The doctor's control snapped completely. The original will provide it handsomely for my retirement, recognized my contributions with a substantial bequest. But you poisoned his mind against everyone who had served him faithfully, convinced him that loyalty counted for nothing against your modern notions of charity and public legacy. Poirot moved to examine the doctor's medical bag, which had slipped from nerveless fingers to scatter its contents across the Persian carpet. Among the usual physician's implements, stethoscope, thermometer, various vials, I spotted a small atomizer of the type used for throat treatments. With your permission, Doctor? Poirot lifted the device delicately. Eucalyptus oil, the label indicates. Most soothing for respiratory ailments. He did not touch it directly, but studied its silver nozzle with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient manuscripts. The beauty of your method, Dr. Thornbury, lay in its medical sophistication and its psychological misdirection. He moved to Sir Reginald's chair, his movements deliberate and instructive. You understood that aconitine is treacherously bitter. In a glass of neat brandy, the palate would protest unless the dose were precise and the application nearly invisible. A fine mist upon the rim of the glass would be sufficient. Swift, almost undetectable, and delivered at the exact moment when attention was focused elsewhere. Dr. Thornbury's face had gone ashen. "You cannot prove such a theory." "Can I not?" Poirot's grey eyes gleamed with that familiar light of intellectual triumph. "During the evening's festivities, you approached Sir Reginald several times in your professional capacity, checking his pulse, ensuring his comfort, the natural concern of a family physician. On one of these approaches, while the company's attention was drawn to the piano performance and the flower arrangements were being adjusted, you applied your prepared solution to the precise spot where Sir Reginald's lips would touch when drinking." He gestured toward the small table beside the chair. "The timing was crucial. Sir Reginald had to consume enough of the treated brandy to receive a fatal dose, but the poison had to act quickly enough to prevent any possibility of medical intervention. Intervention that you, as the attending physician, would naturally be expected to provide." Patricia suddenly gasped, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. "The eucalyptus scent. I noticed it during the evening, but thought nothing of it. Dr. Thornbury said he was treating a slight cough." "Indeed, madame, the perfect cover for the distinctive aroma that would mask any residual bitterness from the poison." Poirot turned back to the doctor, whose shoulders had begun to sag under the weight of exposure. "But your masterstroke was not merely the murder itself, but the elaborate misdirection designed to ensure Lady Cordelia would be blamed. You understood that her pharmaceutical connections, her recent marriage, her composed demeanor would make her the perfect suspect." Alan stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Begging pardon, sir, but I did see Dr. Thornbury near the music room passage earlier in the evening, carrying that stained napkin. Said he was looking for the water closet, though he's been to this house countless times." "The final theatrical touch," Poirot said with grim satisfaction. "Planting evidence where it would be discovered at the appropriate moment. But you made one crucial error in your otherwise masterful performance, Doctor. You underestimated the very woman you sought to frame." Lady Cordelia inclined her head with something approaching respect. "I confess, Monsieur Poirot, I'd begun to suspect Dr. Thornbury's involvement when he so helpfully provided details about my supposed medical curiosities to Inspector Bradshaw. His eagerness to implicate me was rather transparent once one looked for it." "But the will?" Inspector Bradshaw pressed, his earlier certainty about Lady Cordelia's guilt now completely abandoned. "Why destroy it if you were confident she would be blamed?" Poirot's expression grew grave. "Because, Inspector, the will contained provisions that would have exposed Dr. Thornbury's true motive. Not merely the elimination of his bequest, but something far more damaging to his reputation and his future prospects." The document revealed that Sir Reginald intended to establish a charitable medical foundation, with Dr. Thornbury's years of alleged incompetence and questionable treatments as the motivation for ensuring proper medical care for the poor. Dr. Thornbury's final reserves of resistance crumbled. "He was going to destroy me," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. 23 years of faithful service, and he was going to leave a public record of supposed failures, supposed negligence. My reputation, my practice, my family's future, all sacrificed to salve his conscience and impress his new wife with his philanthropy. The confession hung in the air like smoke from the dying fire. Here, in this elegant drawing room, surrounded by crystal and silk and the trappings of civilization, we had witnessed the complete psychological unraveling of a man whose wounded pride had driven him to murder. The trusted family physician, keeper of secrets and guardian of health, had become the very agent of death he had sworn to oppose. Poirot observed the broken man with that mixture of satisfaction and melancholy that always marked the conclusion of his investigations. The truth had been exposed, the guilty party revealed, but the human cost of such revelation was never lost on him. "The little grey cells," he murmured to me quietly. "They see not only the method and the motive, but the terrible logic that transforms a healer into a killer. It is a lesson, mon ami, in the dangerous power of wounded pride." Inspector Bradshaw moved forward with the measured authority of the law, but Poirot forestalled him with a slight gesture, his keen eyes studying Dr. Thornbury's defeated posture with that mixture of professional satisfaction and human sympathy that marked the conclusion of his most complex cases. "Un moment, Inspector," Poirot said quietly. "Before we proceed with the formalities, there remain certain details that must be laid bare completely. The truth, once begun, demands its full exposition." He moved to the fireplace where the charred fragments of the will lay scattered among the dying coals. "Among these ashes, we find more than mere paper. Observe, Hastings, this small fragment of red wax bearing the faint impression of the Belmont family crest." He lifted the remnant delicately on the blade of a paper knife, carrying it to the lamplight where the rampant stag's outline could just be discerned. The envelope was sealed with the family signet, as was Sir Reginald's custom. Yet here, on Dr. Thornbury's left cuff, we find the smallest smear of the same wax, with flecks of ash embedded within it. A foolish trifle, perhaps, but the foolish trifles are often the building stones of absolute certainty. Dr. Thornbury looked down at his sleeve as if seeing it for the first time, his professional composure crumbling entirely. "I tended the fire," he said weakly, but the protest carried no conviction. "Indeed you did, Doctor, but you tended it with a very specific purpose." Poirot's voice carried that dangerous softness I had learned to recognize. "You destroyed that will because it contained not merely the elimination of your bequest, but something far more damaging to your reputation and future prospects. Sir Reginald intended to establish a charitable medical foundation, motivated by what he had come to believe were your years of outdated practices and questionable treatments. The document would have served as a public indictment of your professional competence." The doctor's shoulders sagged under the weight of complete exposure. 23 years of faithful service," he whispered, his voice raw with desperation. 23 years of midnight calls, of saving lives, of believing myself indispensable to that family. And he was going to destroy me, publicly, permanently, to salve his conscience and impress his new wife with his philanthropy. Lady Cordelia, who had maintained her enigmatic composure throughout the evening, finally spoke with quiet authority. "I suspected something was amiss when you made such a point of mentioning my pharmaceutical connections to Inspector Bradshaw, Doctor. Your eagerness to provide evidence against me was rather transparent once I began to consider your true motives." "You knew," Patricia gasped, her handkerchief twisted beyond recognition. "I suspected. The eucalyptus scent was wrong, too strong, too deliberate, and the second bottle of brandy I requested? I noticed the peculiar bouquet of the first, that medicinal undertone beneath the Napoleon. I thought perhaps Reginald was developing a cold and that Dr. Thornbury had been treating him with inhalants. I wished to persuade him to choose a fresh bottle, but he refused. He always insisted on finishing what he began." Poirot nodded with grim satisfaction. "Most observant, madame. You were conducting your own little test, were you not? But let us reconstruct the crime in its entirety, for the method was as elegant as it was deadly." He moved to Sir Reginald's chair, his movements precise and instructive. "The poison, aconitine derived from wolfsbane, was not introduced into the bottle, which would have been too risky and easily detected. Instead, it was applied directly to the rim of Sir Reginald's glass, using this." He gestured toward the atomizer that had spilled from Dr. Thornbury's medical bag. A device commonly found in any physician's kit, typically used for throat treatments. The eucalyptus solution provided perfect cover, masking any residual bitterness from the poison while offering a plausible explanation for the distinctive aroma. A fine mist applied to the precise spot where Sir Reginald's lips would touch when drinking. Swift, nearly undetectable, yet sufficient to deliver a fatal dose. Dr. Thornbury raised his head, his eyes blazing with the last remnants of wounded pride. "The timing had to be perfect. Sir Reginald had to consume enough of the treated brandy to receive a lethal dose, but the poison had to act quickly enough to prevent any possibility of medical intervention. intervention that I, as the attending physician, would naturally be expected to provide. And the elaborate frame constructed around Lady Cordelia, Poirot pressed gently. She destroyed everything. The doctor's control snapped completely. Her influence poisoned his mind against everyone who had served him faithfully. The original will provided handsomely for my retirement, recognized my contributions, but she convinced him that loyalty counted for nothing against her modern notions of charity and public legacy. His voice dropped to a bitter whisper. I planted the stained napkin in the passage, hoping to implicate her. Her pharmaceutical connections, her composed demeanor, she seemed the perfect suspect. Alan stepped forward reluctantly. Begging pardon, sir, but I did see Dr. Thornbury in that passage earlier, carrying something in his hand. Said he was looking for the water closet, though he's been to this house countless times. The final theatrical touch, Poirot observed, but you made one crucial error in your otherwise masterful performance, Doctor. You underestimated the very woman you sought to frame. Her intelligence, her observation, her refusal to break under the pressure of suspicion. Lady Cordelia inclined her head with something approaching respect for her would-be destroyer. I confess, Monsieur Poirot, there was a certain satisfaction in maintaining my composure while watching Dr. Thornbury's increasingly desperate attempts to implicate me. The smile you found so mysterious, Hastings, was partly defiance. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Inspector Bradshaw, who had been listening with growing amazement, finally stepped forward. Dr. Ernest Thornbury, I'm arresting you for the willful murder of Sir Reginald Belmont. You're not obliged to say anything, unless you wish to do so, but whatever you say will be taken down in writing and may be given in evidence. As the handcuffs closed around the doctor's wrists, he looked at Lady Cordelia with an expression that mingled hatred and grudging admiration. I thought you would break, he said simply. You did not. Perhaps, in your way, you were trying to save that family from its own weaknesses. I was too blinded by pride to see it. The constables led him away with professional courtesy, their footsteps echoing through the marble foyer of Belmont House. The sound seemed to mark the end of an era, not merely the conclusion of our investigation, but the final dissolution of old loyalties and ancient certainties that had bound this household together for more than 2 decades. In the silence that followed, Poirot stood by the fireplace, studying the charred fragments with philosophical detachment. The little grey cells have done their duty, he murmured to me quietly. But they cannot heal the wounds that pride and betrayal have inflicted upon the human heart. Come, Hastings. Our work here is finished, but the echoes of this tragedy will linger long after justice has been served. As we prepared to leave Belmont House, I reflected on the evening's revelations and the terrible logic that had transformed a trusted healer into a calculating killer. The widow's smile, so mysterious at the beginning of our investigation, now seemed perfectly comprehensible. Not the expression of guilt, but the quiet satisfaction of a woman whose innocence had been dramatically vindicated by the very methods designed to destroy her. The drawing-room of Belmont House seemed to exhale with relief as the constable's footsteps faded into the London night, leaving behind that peculiar hush I have noticed after great storms, when survivors whisper not from necessity, but from awe. The assembled company remained frozen in their positions, as if the dramatic conclusion of our investigation had left them uncertain how to resume the ordinary rhythms of existence. The fire had burned low, casting shifting shadows across the Persian carpet where Sir Reginald's brandy glass had shattered what felt like hours, but had been mere minutes before. Poirot, ever methodical, requested a few remaining courtesies from Inspector Bradshaw, who, sobered now and almost deferential, acceded at once. "Before we depart," my friend announced with characteristic precision, "there remains one matter of considerable importance. The destruction of Sir Reginald's will creates certain legal complications that must be addressed immediately." Kersey brought lamps to the study, where the telephone sat like a sentinel of modern certainty amid the old leather and oak. At Poirot's request, the butler rang Sir Reginald's solicitor, who, by some miracle of London diligence, answered from his chambers despite the hour. Poirot put his questions with delicate brevity and replaced the receiver with a small nod of satisfaction. There exists, as I suspected, an executed draft lodged this very evening with the solicitor, he announced to the assembled company. What burned in the fireplace was Sir Reginald's personal memorandum, an explanation of his motives that he wished read before witnesses. The legal will itself remained secure and valid. Lady Cordelia moved to the long window where the first thin grey of dawn had begun to displace the gaslight. She had long since abandoned the black veil, and with it some part of that disquieting mystery, yet her composure remained absolute. "I am indebted to you, Monsieur Poirot," she said, inclining her head with quiet dignity, "and not solely for clearing my name. For seeing what you wished me to see, madame, and also what you preferred, I did not." Poirot replied with a grave little bow. She regarded him with faint amusement. "You observed that I moved the flowers. It was not to conceal, but to test. I had noticed the eucalyptus scent earlier, and when Dr. Thornbury fussed over Reginald's pulse, I thought to alter the sight lines. If he reached for the glass again, I would see it clearly from this window, but events moved too quickly." "And the veil?" I could not restrain the question that had puzzled me throughout the evening. Her smile held genuine warmth now, though fatigue shadowed her eyes. "A woman married to a dying man learns to keep certain things at hand, Captain Hastings. Reginald wished his party, but he also confided that he might not survive the excitement. I promised him dignity. There are expressions one prefers London society not to catalogue." She paused, her gaze moving to the empty chair where her husband had spent his final moments. "The smile you found so mysterious was partly defiance. I would not give Dr. Thornbury the satisfaction of seeing me break under his accusations." Marcus approached hesitantly, his earlier bravado replaced by something approaching genuine remorse. "Cordelia, I owe you an apology. I allowed suspicion and financial desperation to cloud my judgment. Dr. Thornbury's accusations seemed so plausible, and your composure so—" he struggled for the appropriate word. "Unnatural," she supplied with the faintest trace of amusement. "I understand, Marcus. If the new will stands, you will have enough, but you will not have it to squander. The foundation and the trustees will hold the voting shares. Your income will depend upon service to the company and sobriety in your accounts. Take it as an opportunity, not a sentence." The man swallowed hard, his habitual flippancy deserting him entirely. Patricia's hand sought his, and this time he did not shake it off. "Thank you," he said simply. "I shall endeavour to prove worthy of Father's revised judgment." Mr. Pemberton, drawn as always by the scent of settlement, advanced with a prudent cough. He inquired whether the firm might assist in structuring the charitable foundation. Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Be very sure, monsieur, that the philanthropy does not become merely another department of profit. Sir Reginald intended light, not shadow." Miss Eleanor, who had maintained her rigid posture throughout the investigation, finally allowed her shoulders to relax. "I confess, Cordelia, that I misjudged you severely. Your marriage to my brother seemed so sudden, so calculated. I failed to recognize that you genuinely cared for his welfare." "Thank you, Eleanor. That means more to me than you might imagine." Lady Cordelia's composure softened slightly, revealing glimpses of genuine emotion beneath her carefully maintained facade. As the house stirred toward the melancholy business of mourning, Poirot moved once more to examine Sir Reginald's glass, which still rested where it had fallen. He did not touch it, but studied it with that minute attention which was his alone. "You kept back one detail," I murmured quietly. He smiled with satisfaction. "Two, perhaps. See, Hastings, At the rim there is the faintest whitening where the spirit has dried oddly. It is not the brandy's natural residue. It is the ghost of a precipitate when the mist met the alcohol. And also this— He gestured toward the atomizer from Dr. Thornbury's scattered medical bag. The nozzle bears a hairline nick as from a file. He had ground the aconitine to powder before creating his solution. Small trifles only, but they speak with absolute certainty. The psychology of the crime continued to fascinate him. Dr. Thornbury possessed every advantage: medical knowledge, trusted access, intimate familiarity with his victim's habits. Yet his greatest strength became his ultimate weakness. His very position as family physician made him visible to everyone present, his movements observed and remembered by multiple witnesses. Pride. Hastings. It was wounded pride that transformed a healer into a killer. As we prepared to take our leave, Lady Cordelia approached us one final time. "Monsieur Poirot, you mentioned that Dr. Thornbury had been planning this for some time. How long, do you think?" "Since your marriage altered his position within this household, madame. Perhaps longer. The poison was prepared in advance, waiting for the appropriate moment. Tonight's announcement regarding the will merely provided the final catalyst for action he had been contemplating for months. The truly tragic element is that his fears were largely of his own creation. Sir Reginald valued loyalty, but he valued competence more." The first rays of sunlight streamed through the tall windows as we gathered our coats and hats. The drawing room, scene of such drama and revelation, would soon return to its peaceful elegance, though the echoes of this night would linger long in the memories of those who witnessed it. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said quietly, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision. "Our work here is finished. Order has been restored, though hearts seldom heal as quickly as mysteries are solved. The living must now find their way forward without the dead, and without the one who destroyed the sacred trust between physician and patient." As we stepped into the crisp London dawn, I reflected on the evening's extraordinary revelations and the terrible logic that had transformed a trusted healer into a calculating murderer. The widow's mysterious smile, so unsettling at the beginning of our investigation, now seemed perfectly comprehensible. Not the expression of guilt, but the quiet satisfaction of a woman whose innocence had been dramatically vindicated by the very methods designed to destroy her. "The little grey cells have done their duty," Poirot observed as our hansom cab carried us through the awakening streets of Mayfair. "But they cannot heal the wounds that pride and betrayal have inflicted upon the human heart. Yet perhaps, mon ami, there is some small comfort in knowing that justice, however delayed, inevitably finds its mark." The case of the widow who smiled through her veil was closed, but its lessons about the dangerous power of wounded pride would remain with us always. The early morning light filtering through the grand windows of Belmont House cast a pallor over the remaining occupants, transforming the elegant drawing room into something resembling a stage after the final curtain. Inspector Bradshaw, having seen Dr. Thornbury safely into the police van, returned briefly to ensure all necessary statements were taken, and that the scene was properly secured. His initial bluster had been replaced by quiet respect for Poirot's deductions, a testament to my friend's ability to untangle the most complex psychological puzzles. Lady Cordelia approached us with quiet grace, her earlier enigmatic composure now replaced by something approaching genuine warmth. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I cannot adequately express my gratitude. You have not only uncovered the truth, but have also, I believe, saved this family from further decay." "Madame," Poirot replied with a slight bow, "it was merely the duty of the little grey cells, but the true strength lay in your own remarkable fortitude. To maintain such composure whilst under the most grievous suspicion, that indeed required considerable courage." Marcus Belmont, looking considerably chastened, stood apart from his stepmother, his face pale but marked with new thoughtfulness. Patricia, no longer clinging desperately to his arm, seemed to have shed her brittle cheerfulness for a more subdued yet honest demeanor. Miss Eleanor, surprisingly, offered Lady Cordelia a tentative hand, a silent gesture of reconciliation that spoke volumes about the family's capacity for healing. "The arrangements will proceed as Sir Reginald intended," Lady Cordelia announced quietly. "The solicitor confirms that the will stands valid, despite Dr. Thornbury's desperate attempt to destroy it. The charitable foundation will be established, and Marcus will have his opportunity to prove himself worthy of the family trust." As we prepared to depart Belmont House, Poirot surveyed the drawing-room one final time, his gaze lingering on the fireplace where the will had been consumed, then moving to the empty chair where Sir Reginald had drawn his last breath. "The stage is cleared, Hastings," he murmured, "but the actors will carry their parts with them for a very long time." 2 days later, I found myself once again in the familiar comfort of Poirot's sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions, where my friend was arranging his morning correspondence with characteristic precision. The newspapers had devoted considerable attention to what the Times termed the Belmont House tragedy, though their accounts bore little resemblance to the complex psychological drama we had witnessed. "The press, Hastings, they hunger for sensation, but possess no appetite for truth," Poirot observed, folding the morning edition with distaste. "They write of poison and inheritance, but they comprehend nothing of the deeper currents that drive human beings to destroy what they once cherished." A knock at the door interrupted his reflections. George announced Lady Cordelia Belmont, who entered wearing mourning dress of impeccable cut, her grey eyes holding a clarity that spoke of resolution rather than grief. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, inclining her head gracefully. "I've come to thank you properly and to share certain developments that may interest you." Poirot gestured toward the chair opposite his own, his manner conveying that mixture of professional courtesy and genuine warmth I had observed in his dealings with those who had earned his respect. "Madame, you honor us with your visit. I trust the legal complications have been resolved satisfactorily." Indeed they have. The will reading revealed details that surprised even me. She accepted the tea George offered, her movements betraying no trace of strain. The charitable medical foundation will be established as planned, but with a provision I had not anticipated. Dr. Thornbury's name appears nowhere as an object of criticism. Instead, the foundation is dedicated to advancing modern medical practices while honoring the faithful service of country physicians who lack access to contemporary knowledge. The revelation struck me as remarkably generous. Poirot's eyebrows rose with interest. "Your husband was a man of considerable wisdom. Even in his final provisions, he sought to heal rather than wound." "There is more," Lady Cordelia continued. "Marcus has accepted the position of managing director under the new structure, with Patricia as his assistant. The gambling debts will be settled, but future income depends entirely upon their performance. Dr. Thornbury has been committed to Broadmoor. The magistrate accepted a plea of temporary insanity brought on by professional disappointment. He will receive treatment rather than punishment." "Justice tempered with mercy," Poirot observed. "Perhaps the most we can hope for when pride destroys both victim and perpetrator." For the first time since I had known her, Lady Cordelia's composure softened into something approaching vulnerability. "There is also a personal matter I wish to discuss, Monsieur Poirot. Your investigation revealed not only the truth about Sir Reginald's murder, but certain truths about myself that I had not fully acknowledged." Poirot waited with that patient attention which encouraged confession without demanding it. The smile that so disturbed Captain Hastings was not entirely what I claimed, she admitted quietly. Yes, it was partly defiance against Dr. Thornbury's accusations, but it was also relief. Relief that Sir Reginald's suffering had ended. Relief that the charade of pretending our marriage was based on romantic love could finally be abandoned. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I married him out of genuine affection and a desire to ease his final years, but I was never in love with him. The smile was my acknowledgement that I was finally free to be honest about my motivations. The confession hung in the air like incense, sacred and slightly bitter. Poirot nodded with understanding rather than judgment. Honesty, madame, is perhaps the rarest virtue in matters of the heart. Your husband, I believe, understood this better than you imagined. A man does not revise his will to benefit a wife he believes married him solely for money. He revises it to honor a woman who brought dignity and comfort to his final years, regardless of her deeper feelings. After Lady Cordelia departed, we sat in comfortable silence, each absorbed in reflections on the case that had brought us together. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting familiar shadows across Poirot's meticulously ordered domain. "Tell me, mon ami," Poirot said finally, "what did you learn from our encounter with the widow who smiled through her veil?" I considered the question carefully. That appearances deceive, but behavior reveals. That the most dangerous criminals are often those we trust most completely. And that sometimes the most mysterious smile conceals not guilt, but the complex emotions of someone trying to navigate impossible circumstances with dignity. Excellent, Hastings. But there is one lesson more important than all others. Poirot's grey eyes held that familiar gleam of intellectual satisfaction. In matters of crime, as in matters of the heart, we must look beyond what people say and observe what they do. Dr. Thornbury spoke of loyalty and service, but his actions revealed wounded pride and calculated revenge. Lady Cordelia spoke little of her feelings, but her behavior demonstrated genuine care, even in the face of false accusation. He rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the London streets where countless human dramas played beyond our observation. The little grey cells serve us well in unraveling criminal behavior, but they serve us better still in understanding the mysteries of human nature itself. As evening settled over Whitehaven Mansions, I reflected on the extraordinary case that had begun with a birthday celebration and ended with the exposure of murder most sophisticated. The widow's smile, so mysterious and unsettling at first encounter, had ultimately revealed itself as a symbol of human resilience in the face of tragedy and false accusation. "Come, Hastings," Poirot said, adjusting his tie with characteristic precision. "Let us take our evening constitutional. The streets of London hold many secrets, but tonight they seem less mysterious than they did 3 days ago. Order has been restored, truth has been revealed, and justice, however imperfect, has found its mark." As we stepped into the gaslit streets of Mayfair, I found myself thinking of the complex terrain of duty, affection, and self-preservation that human beings must navigate while maintaining dignity and truth. The case of the widow who smiled through her veil was closed, but its lessons about the dangerous power of wounded pride and the redemptive possibility of honest acknowledgement would remain with us always. In the end, Hercule Poirot had done more than solve a murder. He had illuminated the shadowy corners of the human heart, where love and deception, loyalty and betrayal, pride and humility waged their eternal battles. The little grey cells had triumphed once again, but their greatest victory was not in exposing the guilty, but in vindicating the innocent and revealing the complex truths that govern human behavior in all its mysterious manifestations.